For the last 2 years, my life has been a repeating loop of grey. Wake up in my crappy, one-room apartment. Walk to my dead-end job stocking shelves at a big box store. Walk home, eat something cheap, stare at the stained ceiling until I fall asleep. The defining feature of my existence wasn't sadness or anger. It was silence, a deep, profound, suffocating silence that filled every corner of my tiny apartment and my empty life. The hum of the old refrigerator, the drip of the leaky faucet, those were my companions. I couldn't afford internet, and my phone was a pay-as-you-go brick that could barely make calls. Entertainment wasn't in the budget. The loneliness was the worst part. It was a physical weight. So, after a particularly brutal week of overtime, I took the extra $40 I'd earned and decided to do something for myself. I decided to buy a television. New was out of the question. Even the cheapest flat screen was a month's worth of groceries. But on my route to work, there was this place. A junk shop, really. Its windows were caked with so much grime you couldn't see inside, and a flickering neon sign just said, "Buy and sell." It smelled like dust and ozone and forgotten things. The owner was an old man with cloudy eyes who just grunted and pointed when I asked if he had any TVs. He led me to the back, to a graveyard of old electronics. There, among the dead VCRs and skeletal radios, was a TV. It was an old CRT model, a heavy beige plastic cube with a bulging glass screen and clunky dials instead of buttons. It was probably from the early 1990s. It was ugly, but it was big, and the old man swore it worked. $20. I hauled it the half-mile back to my apartment, my arms screaming in protest. That night, for the first time in years, my apartment wasn't silent. I plugged it in, attached a cheap set of rabbit ear antennas I'd bought for $1, and after a burst of static, a picture flickered to life. It was glorious. The sound of a cheesy sitcom, the bright, saturated colors. It was like a window had been opened in my grey little prison cell. It pushed the silence back. I felt normal, less alone. For the first few weeks, it was my lifeline. I'd come home from work, turn it on, and just let the noise wash over me. I watched old movies, news channels, bad reality shows. It didn't matter what was on. It was just noise. It was a voice that wasn't mine. The channels were a strange mix. I was in a low-lying part of the city, so reception was spotty. I got the main local affiliates, a Spanish-language station, a 24-hour weather channel, and a bunch of fuzzy public access feeds. It was while I was turning the stiff dial one night, trying to find a clear picture, that I found it. It wasn't a normal channel. There was no station identifier in the corner, no commercials, no sound. There was just a high-numbered channel, 87, that came in with perfect crystal clarity. The image was of a room, a completely white, seamless room with no doors or windows visible. In the exact center of the room sat a wooden chair, and on the chair sat a man. He was wearing a simple, dark grey suit that was a little too big for him. He had thinning brown hair and a tired-looking face, and he was just sitting there, staring directly forward, directly at the camera, directly at me. My first thought was that it was some kind of minimalist art project, one of those things you see in a modern art museum, or maybe a prank. I watched for 10 minutes. He didn't move. He didn't even blink. The sheer stillness of it was unnerving, but also compelling. In a house full of manufactured noise, this silent, staring man was the quietest thing of all. Eventually, I got bored and turned the channel, but the image of him stayed with me. A few nights later, my curiosity got the better of me. I turned the dial back to channel 87. He was still there. Same suit, same chair, same unwavering stare. I left it on as I made my dinner, glancing over at the screen every few minutes. It was like having a very strange, very still roommate. Then he moved. It was a small movement, but after hours of total stillness, it felt like an earthquake. He slowly raised a hand and rubbed his stomach. A quiet, circular motion. Then he sighed, a sound that was barely audible through the TV's tinny speakers. I scrambled for the volume dial, cranking it all the way up. A low hiss filled the room, and underneath it, I could just make out a voice. His voice. He was muttering to himself. "Getting hungry," he mumbled, his voice raspy. He shifted in the chair, the wood creaking. "Wonder how much longer. Should have had a bigger breakfast." I froze, my half-eaten bowl of ramen forgotten in my hands. This wasn't just a static image. The man was real. This was happening now. Was it some kind of weird reality show? Like a human endurance test? Last man sitting gets $1 million? It seemed plausible. I found myself hooked. This was more interesting than any scripted drama. It felt real. I started checking in on him every night. I called him the man in the room. It became part of my routine. Come home, turn on channel 87. Most of the time, he was just sitting there, but every now and then, he'd do something. He'd stretch his legs, he'd yawn, he'd talk to himself. "Water," he said one night, licking his dry lips. "Could really use some water." He looked around the empty white room, a flicker of annoyance on his face. Said they'd be right back. That was hours ago. He looked back at the camera, at me. His stare felt different now. It wasn't just vacant, it felt expectant, like he was waiting for something to happen. A week after I first found the channel, things started to change. His monologues got longer, more desperate. He wasn't just complaining about being hungry or thirsty anymore. He was getting confused. "Hello?" he said one evening, his voice louder than usual. He was leaning forward in the chair. "Is anyone out there? The shoot was supposed to be over at 5. What time is it?" He paused, listening to the silence of his white room. "Why isn't anyone saying anything? This isn't funny." I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. This was starting to feel less like a game show and more like something cruel. I was the only one listening to him. He was talking to a film crew that apparently had abandoned him. I felt a strange sense of responsibility, mixed with a morbid, can't-look-away fascination. The real horror began last month. I came home from a particularly draining shift, my feet aching, my mind numb. I turned on the TV to channel 87 out of habit. The man was no longer sitting. He was on his feet, pacing the small area visible on the screen. His suit was rumpled, his hair was a mess, and his face was slick with sweat. He looked frantic. "Okay, that's it. I'm done," he yelled at the camera. "You hear me? This job isn't worth it. I'm leaving." He turned and strode purposefully toward the left side of the screen, as if to walk off a movie set. I watched, my heart suddenly pounding, expecting him to just disappear from the frame. He didn't. He walked about 5 feet and then ran face first into nothing. There was a dull, fleshy thump that came through the speakers. He stumbled back, holding his nose, a look of pure, bewildered shock on his face. He reached out a trembling hand and pressed it forward. His fingers splayed out against a perfectly invisible, solid surface. He pressed his face against it, his cheek smushing against the barrier. He looked to his right, then his left. His eyes were wide with dawning terror. He wasn't on a set. He was in a box. Panic seized him. He started pounding on the invisible wall. "What is this?" he screamed, his voice cracking with fear. "What the hell is this? Let me out!" He scrambled to the other side of the frame and slammed into another wall. He ran to the back of the visible area and hit a third. He was trapped, a prisoner in his sterile, white cage. Then he stopped. He turned slowly, his wild, terrified eyes finding the camera again. Finding me. The illusion of a TV show, of a set, of a crew, was shattered. He knew. He knew he was being watched. "You," he whispered, his voice a choked sob. He took a stumbling step forward, his hand outstretched until his face was huge on my screen, pressed right up against the glass on his side. "You're watching me. I can't see you, but I know you're there. Please, please, whoever you are, you have to help me. Can you hear me? Please, get me out of here. I don't know where I am. Please, help me." I was paralyzed. This was real. This wasn't a show. This was a man. trapped somewhere. His prison being broadcast on some ghost frequency into my living room. His screams were real. His terror was real. I was his only audience, his only hope, and I did nothing. A cold, selfish fear washed over me. I couldn't help him. How could I? Call the police. "Hello, officer." There's a man trapped inside my TV. They'd have me committed. What could I possibly do? My hand, shaking uncontrollably, found the channel dial. With a click, I turned it. His desperate, screaming face was replaced by a smiling woman selling car insurance. I ripped the plug from the wall socket. The TV screen went black with a final, dying pop. The silence that rushed back in was heavier than ever before. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the ghost of his screams. I didn't turn the TV on for 3 weeks. I couldn't. I worked extra shifts, anything to keep me out of the apartment. When I was there, I sat in the dark, the silence a constant accusation. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, his hands pressed against the glass, his mouth open in a scream I had silenced. I told myself it was a hoax, a very, very elaborate and cruel prank, a deep fake, anything but the truth. Last night, I finally broke. The loneliness was gnawing at me again, and the silence was driving me insane. I just wanted to hear something else. I plugged the TV back in. I told myself I would not, under any circumstances, go to Channel 87. I'd stick to the news, to movies, to anything normal. I must have been turning the dial too quickly. My finger slipped. For a single, horrifying second, the dial rested on Channel 87. The image that flashed onto the screen will be burned into my memory until the day I die. The room was the same. The empty white box. The wooden chair was on its side, as if it had been kicked over in a struggle, and on the floor, next to the chair, was the man, or what was left of him. He was lying on his back, his body bloated and discolored. His cheap suit was stained and torn. His mouth was open in a silent, final scream, and his flesh was writhing. It took my brain a second to process what I was seeing. It was a shifting, squirming carpet of white. Maggots. I saw it for maybe 2 seconds before I lunged forward and changed the channel, but the image was seared onto the inside of my eyelids. I stood there for a moment, my body trembling, and then I turned and vomited the entire contents of my stomach onto my linoleum floor. He was dead. He had starved to death, or died of thirst. Alone, in that box, screaming for a help that never came, a help that I had denied him. I didn't just watch a man die, I was the last person he ever spoke to. I was his god, and I had changed the channel. I don't remember much of the next hour. It was a blur of frantic energy and pure animal terror. I ripped the TV from the wall, cords and antennas trailing behind it. It was heavy, but adrenaline is a powerful thing. I half carried, half dragged it out of my apartment, down the 3 flights of stairs, and out to the alley behind my building. I heaved it into the dumpster, where it landed with a sickening crunch and a final sigh of cracking glass. I spent the rest of my savings this morning on a cheap, new flat-screen TV from the store where I work. It's still in the box. I'm afraid to turn it on. I'm terrified that I'll be flipping through the crisp digital channels and I'll find it. Channel 87. I'm terrified of what I might see there now. An empty room, or a new occupant.